Have you ever spent years building something so vital that it seemed unimaginable anyone would try to remove you from it, only to be quietly, clinically erased by the very system you helped strengthen? That was the question echoing in my mind as I sat across from Caleb Mendez, the newly minted Chief Operating Officer, who now slid a glossy manila envelope across the marble conference table like it was a formality. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't need to. Everything he wanted to say was written on embossed letterhead. Effective immediately, your role is being dissolved as we realign our strategic vision. No warning. No gratitude. Just a sentence, polished by lawyers and devoid of memory. My name is Alexander Drake, 52, senior partner, founding architect of one of Manhattan's top asset management firms. 15 years of growth, risk, and loyalty, packaged into a half-page termination letter. I nodded once quietly. No resistance. No visible anger. There's a particular kind of clarity that settles in the moment someone believes they've outmaneuvered you, especially when they've just made the gravest miscalculation of their career. They thought I was just another executive. They forgot I was the reason the firm existed at all. I didn't start in boardrooms. My first job was at a regional bank in Newark, wearing a polyester tie and walking a mile to catch the morning train. I wasn't born into finance. I earned every decimal of it. The early years were lean: cold apartment floors, second-hand suits, ramen dinners while studying client portfolios until 2 a.m. By the time I was 30, I'd moved into boutique wealth management and quickly made a name for myself. Not with charm or pedigree, but by doing what others wouldn't. I returned. Client calls on Sundays. I met retirees in their kitchens. I talked hedge strategies without arrogance and explained compounding interest with the patience of a teacher. My reputation wasn't built on charisma. It was built on showing up. Always. By 40, I co-founded Armitage Drake & Co. with 2 partners. Within 3 years, we were managing just under $1 billion in private wealth. When the market crashed in 2008, I didn't retreat. I called every client personally. I talked them through the chaos, adjusted portfolios overnight, and, more importantly, kept their trust. That year, while many firms folded or shrank, we grew by 14%. I became the face of stability, the guy who didn't flinch. Our AUM doubled, then tripled. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. Reputation in our world spreads with the quiet gravity of certainty. By year 10, I was managing accounts for Fortune 500 CEOs, venture capitalists, retired athletes, and third-generation family funds. I wasn't just a partner, I was the anchor. The one they called when their children graduated, when they bought vineyards in Sonoma, or gave 7-figure donations to cancer research. I'd earned their trust not through contracts, but through consistency. Behind the numbers was sacrifice. My daughter, Lila, barely saw me during her middle school years. My ex-wife, Elena, once told me I loved the Dow more than I loved dinner. She wasn't wrong. I missed recitals, birthdays, a 5th wedding anniversary. There's a particular ache that comes from watching your family celebrate life without you, while you manage other people's futures. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. That legacy required distance. That one day I'd slow down and enjoy the world I helped others secure. But the grind doesn't stop when you reach the top. It accelerates. You stop building for money and start building for permanence. I hired junior advisors, mentored talent, gave bonuses no one asked for because I knew loyalty couldn't be faked. I protected the firm's reputation like it was my family name. And in a way it was. My name was on the glass. My sweat was in the walls. I didn't see myself as invincible, but I also didn't see the knife coming. Not from someone like Caleb. Not from the same board I carried through a decade of volatility. I was still operating under the old code. Respect earns stability. But the landscape had shifted while I was busy defending the firm's future. And now, with a single letter, they'd pushed me out of the empire I'd helped build. Not because I failed, but because I succeeded in ways that made me too permanent, too trusted, too irreplaceable for their plans. They didn't want legacy. They wanted control. The erosion didn't begin with a pink slip. It began with the silence. Not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that hums just beneath the surface, loaded with omission. It started 6 months before the termination, when Caleb Mendez arrived as the new COO, a man in his 30s with polished sneakers, an Ivy League MBA, and a resume that sounded like it had been written by ChatGPT. He was all posture and vocabulary, synergy, disrupt, scale. In meetings, he spoke in phrases meant to impress analysts but said little of substance. And yet, the board adored him. To them, he represented modernization. To me, he was a warning flare in a tailored blazer. At first, it was small. I was removed from the quarterly strategy review meeting. When I asked, the response was, "We're trying a more data-driven format." Then Julia, my executive assistant of nearly 8 years, was promoted to another department without so much as a heads up. In her place, I received an intern, bright, polite, but woefully inexperienced. Then came the subtle exclusions. Project memos no longer copied me. Team lunches moved without notice. Financial models I'd built were rebranded under new analysts' names. It was a campaign, not a conflict. Death by 1,000 cuts. I didn't react. That's what they expected. Instead, I documented. I watched. My office, once the corner suite with Central Park views, was reassigned during an internal reorganization to a smaller space down the hall, conveniently closer to the elevator. I told myself it didn't matter. But symbolism has weight. Power doesn't just operate through titles, it's expressed through physical space. I was being downsized in every way but salary. Then came the whisper campaigns. A long-time client, Evelyn Rothschild, asked me over dinner why the firm had told her I was stepping back from client-facing work. Another asked who Alex's replacement would be. The messaging was coordinated, and worse, it was being delivered before I'd even been informed. The younger advisors started quoting Caleb in meetings like he was a philosopher. Caleb says we should decentralize client relationships. Caleb believes the future is less human-dependent. I'd spent 2 decades proving the opposite, that relationships were the only real currency in wealth management. By the time my travel budget was reduced and required 2 layers of approval, I knew what was happening. I was being phased out, not for lack of results, but because I was inconvenient. My clients called me directly. I didn't filter through systems. I answered questions before emails were sent. That kind of agility doesn't fit a scalable spreadsheet. Still, I kept performing. My portfolios outperformed benchmarks. I brought in 3 new clients in Q2, including a high-profile tech CEO who'd left a competitor just to work with me. But inside the firm, my influence was fading. At meetings, people deferred to Caleb even when they looked at me. He didn't challenge me openly. He didn't need to. He was replacing respect with process, relationships with automation. To the board, it sounded like evolution. But to anyone who understood the business, it was dilution. And yet I said nothing. I smiled in meetings. I trained the new staff. I signed the birthday cards. Because I'd built empires before, and I knew that kingdoms don't fall from external attack. They collapse when they forget who built the walls. They weren't pushing me out because I'd lost value. They were doing it because I held too much of it. It happened on a Thursday just after lunch, the kind of gray, forgettable afternoon that doesn't hint at anything significant. I had just returned from a client lunch with a long-time account, a 3rd-generation family office worth over $200 million, when I received a meeting request labeled Realignment Discussion, Confidential. No details, no agenda. Just a location, Caleb's office. He didn't stand when I entered. His desk was spotless except for the cream envelope lying precisely centered before him. I'd seen enough boardroom maneuvers in my life to recognize the setup. One glance at the HR rep sitting just out of frame, pretending to be busy with her laptop, confirmed everything. We're restructuring the firm's leadership to meet emerging strategic needs, Caleb said, his voice sterile, memorized. Effective immediately, we're dissolving your position. Your contributions have been appreciated. He slid the envelope across the desk with a controlled flick of the fingers. I didn't open it, I didn't need to. There was no discussion, no thanks, no acknowledgement of the years I'd spent building not just portfolios, but the firm's reputation, its trust, its integrity. He didn't look at me as a partner. He looked at me as a line item. I nodded once, stood, and walked out. No raised voice, no legal threats, no desperate appeals. That's not how dignity operates. It doesn't grovel, it walks quietly. My office was already packed when I returned. A sleek black moving crate waited beside the door, filled with neatly organized files, my Mont Blanc pen, a photo of Lila from her high school graduation, and a single crystal award that read, Visionary Leadership, 2014. The symbolism was razor sharp. I'd built a legacy, and they'd reduced it to inventory. As I rolled the crate down the corridor, no one made eye contact. A few glanced up, then looked away with the same awkward discomfort reserved for funerals or breakups. I passed the boardroom, the same one where I'd once presented growth strategies that saved the firm during the housing collapse, and caught my reflection in the glass. Not angry, not even sad, just clear. I exited the building through the side entrance. No farewell party, no speech, not even a press release. They wanted me erased quietly, like a whisper in a crowded room. But the problem with removing the foundation is that the structure always feels it, even if the cracks don't show immediately. As the driver pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back, not at the tower, not at the plaque with my name on it near the lobby entrance. I simply looked ahead and thought, they didn't just fire a man. They severed their only connection to what made them valuable. What they hadn't realized yet, what they'd never thought to calculate, was that in cutting me loose, they hadn't freed themselves. They'd just guaranteed their own collapse. That evening, my apartment felt unusually still. The kind of quiet that amplifies small sounds, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of traffic far below. I set the crate from the office down on the marble countertop and poured myself a glass of scotch, not out of habit but ceremony. There's a particular type of silence that arrives not with defeat, but with awareness. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. I stood by the window looking out over the city I had helped reshape through the portfolios I managed, the deals I brokered, the legacies I protected. Somewhere out there, half a dozen CEOs were making decisions based on my last quarterly call. They didn't know I was gone yet, but they would. And when they did, they wouldn't call Caleb. They'd call me, not because of loyalty, because of trust. Corporations love to pretend that trust is transferable, that systems matter more than people. But in my line of work, clients don't follow logos. They follow the voice that answers their calls at midnight. The one who's seen their balance sheets and still remembers their kid's graduation date. That was never the firm. That was me. I pulled out my personal laptop and opened a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in months. It wasn't firm property, just a list I kept out of habit. Contact names, birthdays, preferences, family details. Not transaction records, relationships. Some of these clients had started with just 6 figures and a handshake. Now they managed generational wealth, and every step of their growth had gone through me. I didn't draft any emails, didn't call anyone, no threats, no pitch decks, just clarity. Then I picked up my phone and created a private Slack workspace. One channel, one name, Project Restoration. I wasn't going to beg anyone to leave Armitage Drake. I didn't need to. All I had to do was let them know I was no longer there. The rest would happen on its own. I thought about the non-compete clause in my contract. I'd reviewed it once, months ago. It only applied in cases of voluntary departure. Termination nullified the restriction. Caleb's clinical move had opened the door without realizing it. That kind of oversight only happens when you believe someone's already powerless. But I wasn't powerless. I was quiet. And there's a difference. The power I held wasn't in the building or the title or the corner office they took away. It was in the relationships I'd built, one at a time, with consistency, humility, and results. They couldn't reassign that. They couldn't automate it. They couldn't scale it or suppress it. They could only pretend it wasn't worth protecting until it walked out the door. I closed the laptop, finished the scotch, and stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by artifacts of a life built on trust. This wasn't a setback. This was position. And now, the question wasn't whether they would regret letting me go. It was how long it would take before the cracks started to show. I woke the next morning before the sun rose, not out of anxiety, but instinct, the kind honed over decades of early life. Calls with clients in Zurich, Singapore, and San Francisco. The silence was still there, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Readiness. I brewed my coffee without rush, opened the blinds to let in the pale light of a Manhattan dawn, and sat down at the same desk where I'd once built million-dollar strategies between red-eye flights and quarterly reviews. Today there would be no phone calls, no press statements, no scorched earth retaliation, just gravity. At 7 a.m. I sent 3 brief messages, not group emails, not carefully crafted PR copy, just direct personal texts. Wanted you to hear from me first. I'm no longer with Armitage Drake as of yesterday. No drama, just a shift. Grateful for everything we built together. Each message was sent to a client whose portfolio exceeded $100 million, each relationship cultivated not through algorithms or flashy pitch books, but through years of quiet dependability. The responses were immediate. What happened? Who's managing our account now? Where are you going? I didn't answer those questions, not yet. I let the silence carry its own weight. I knew the industry. I knew the psychology. These were not people who tolerated ambiguity, and the firm's silence would do more damage than anything I could say. By noon, I had 10 more messages. By 3 p.m., 5 of my clients had already contacted compliance at Armitage Drake to initiate the process of transferring assets. There were no accusations, no demands, just quiet exits, clean and deliberate. No noise, just absence. It wasn't a protest. It was a statement. Meanwhile, my inbox began to flood with messages from former colleagues, some congratulating me for finally breaking free, others warning me about chaos behind closed doors. Junior advisors were scrambling to answer client questions with half the context. Caleb had sent an internal memo stating I had stepped away to pursue personal interests. The lie was laughable, and it had no legs. Then came the calls I expected, but didn't answer. Caleb, twice. Then someone from the board. By late afternoon, a formal email arrived from the firm's general counsel reminding me of confidentiality agreements. I responded once, politely and legally precise. Please note, I have not solicited or initiated contact with any current clients. Any outreach to me has been unsolicited and independent. It was true. I didn't have to chase loyalty. It had already been earned. That evening I received a call from an old mentee, now a managing director at a boutique firm in Boston. We've got the infrastructure. You'd be fully autonomous, no board, no layers, just clean execution. I told him I'd think about it, but I already knew the answer. This wasn't about starting over. It was about reasserting what had always been true. The trust that drove value didn't live inside a building or beneath a company name. It lived in the people who stayed up late solving problems no one else would touch. In the advisors who understood that discretion mattered more than dashboards. In the rare voice on the other end of the line who said, "I've got it," and actually did. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd underestimated how fast silence could move. It was late Friday when the final piece slid into place, not with drama, but with a short, quiet phone call from someone who hadn't spoken to me in months. Julia, my former assistant. She still worked on the executive floor, now reporting directly to one of the new strategy officers under Caleb. Her voice was low, measured, and laced with something I hadn't heard from her before: guilt. They were never going to keep you. Alex, she said without preamble. The decision was made months ago. Caleb was brought in to make you redundant. I didn't say anything at first. I let the words hang between us, not out of shock, but confirmation. I'd suspected as much. The signs were too methodical to be random, but hearing it laid out stripped away any lingering illusion. There's more, she continued. I've seen internal decks, presentations to Veritas Group. They've been negotiating a quiet acquisition for nearly 5 months. The one condition? Transition major accounts away from individuals and into firm-owned service pods. Your clients were a liability to the deal. And there it was. The playbook. I wasn't pushed out for underperformance or outdated methods. I was surgically removed because I'd become too central, too irreplaceable for the kind of asset the board wanted to sell. They couldn't afford to let client loyalty reside with me. They needed a clean slate, relationships severed from identity, packaged into neat, controllable units. It was business. Cold, sterile, and deliberate. But they'd miscalculated 2 crucial things. 1, how deep those relationships ran. And 2, how much faster trust moves than strategy. Over the weekend, 2 more clients reached out after being approached by people they didn't recognize. New relationship managers pitched as the future of client service. One described the meeting as robotic. Another said it felt like a script. Both ended the conversation with a question. Where are you now? I didn't pitch them. I didn't need to. I simply told the truth. I was no longer affiliated with Armitage Drake. I wasn't building anything yet. But if and when I did, they'd be the first to know. By Monday, I had confirmation from 2 sources. Veritas had postponed their due diligence. Rumors were already circulating that the firm couldn't guarantee asset retention. Without me, the buyer was nervous. With me gone, they couldn't make projections with confidence. The structure had lost its cornerstone. I learned Caleb had been reporting directly to Veritas representatives under an NDA. The board had quietly removed my voting rights on long-term strategic matters months before. They had treated me not as a partner, but as a variable to be phased out. A middleman. A name they hoped would fade quietly. But relationships don't work that way. They don't shift because of job titles. They don't respond to charts or AI-generated retention plans. They move toward trust, history, and proof. That week I made no bold moves. I accepted no offers. I just watched. Watched as former clients began redirecting assets to other firms. Watched as internal emails leaked. Watched as the board scrambled to put a PR spin on the exodus. They had built a strategy based on detachment, on the idea that personal loyalty could be edited out of the equation. But in doing so, they forgot the most basic rule of human capital. You can't sell what people no longer believe in. The decision came not in a flash of inspiration, but in a quiet moment, 3 days after Veritas pulled back. I was walking past the old brownstone where I'd rented a studio in my 20s, back when I was hustling for my first real accounts. It was dusk, the street lamps just warming to life, and I realized something that stopped me mid-step. I didn't want to return to someone else's system. Not another firm, not another board, not another environment where my value would eventually be seen as leverage to extract, not invest in. I wanted to build again, but on my own terms this time. The next morning I made 3 phone calls, not to recruiters, not to headhunters, to allies. A former compliance officer, a tech-savvy portfolio strategist I'd mentored, and a partner-level attorney who'd once told me over drinks, "You're the only guy in this business who actually listens first." All 3 said yes before I even finished my sentences. Within 10 days, we incorporated a new entity, Drake Vale Capital, boutique by design, relationship first by philosophy. No layers of middle management, no buzzword bloat, just clarity, precision and trust, anchored by experience and earned over years, not quarters. Word spread quickly. Clients who had been hesitant now called with conviction. "You're building something? Send me the documents." The first wave of AUM transfer requests hit 7 figures by day 4. Then came a Fortune 100 executive who had quietly followed my departure from Armitage Drake and called one evening with a single sentence, "We'll move all of it. Just tell me where to sign." By the end of the first month, we had over $400 million under management and a pipeline that stretched well into the next fiscal year. Not because of aggressive growth strategies, but because every client conversation started with the same question: what do you need most right now? It wasn't about selling anymore. It was about listening and executing flawlessly. I hired carefully, 3 analysts, 2 operations leads, and 1 rising star advisor who reminded me of myself in my 30s. Sharp, sincere, and allergic to shortcuts. Everyone received profit sharing. Everyone had a seat at the table. There were no silent years of grinding just to prove loyalty. This time, we would build a legacy with equity in every sense of the word. There was no vengeance in my voice when I declined Caleb's request for a reconciliation call. No gloating when I forwarded an email meant for clients about Armitage Drake's internal reorganization, its unexpected client turnover, and the quiet announcement that Caleb would be pursuing new opportunities. I didn't need retribution, because this was the revenge. Not loud, not theatrical, but undeniable. Rebuilding not from rubble, but from clarity. Watching the clients who once defined a firm's prestige choose, of their own volition, to walk toward something smaller, leaner, and more human. I stood in the glass-walled conference room of our temporary space downtown. No skyline view, just clean lines, whiteboards, and intent, and watched as a new kind of empire began to take shape. Not one I had to protect from board votes or strategic consultants. One I owned. One built on names, not numbers. Legacy, reinvented. On my name. My terms. It happened quietly, the way real justice often does, not with headlines or fanfare, but with subtle shifts that couldn't be ignored. Just 3 months after launching Drake Vale Capital, I received a forward from a former colleague. An internal memo from Armitage Drake announcing structural realignment in response to evolving client needs. Beneath the corporate jargon was the truth. Departures had become defections. Over a dozen of my former clients had formally terminated their contracts, citing change in relationship continuity as the primary reason. In finance, that's a polite way of saying, we trusted someone, and you let him go. The board issued no public statements. There was no press release, but I heard through back channels that the Veritas acquisition had officially collapsed. Without the projected AUM, and without the credibility my relationships had brought to the table, the deal simply didn't pencil out. Their golden parachute had vanished. Caleb, once the rising star, was quietly removed. Resigned to pursue new ventures. The kind of phrase that means he was pushed, not walked. A few weeks later, I saw his name pop up in a webinar for transformational leadership in crisis environments. The irony was rich, but I felt no bitterness, only confirmation. Meanwhile, Drake Vale was thriving, not explosively, but deliberately. The kind of steady growth that comes from clients referring other clients, not ad campaigns or press placements. Our renewal rate was 100%. Our feedback? Finally, someone who sees the whole picture. One client sent a handwritten note. You didn't just manage our money, you gave us back our confidence, and then, as if the universe wanted to be. Underline the point, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Elena, my ex-wife. She'd read about the firm in a niche business publication that had profiled us under the headline, "The Advisor Clients Followed." She congratulated me, not for the success, but for the tone of it. You built it with grace, she said. That matters more than you think. Even Lila, now in grad school, called to ask about working with us part-time over the summer. Just to see how you do what you do, she said. I told her she could start whenever she was ready. I never once reached out to Armitage Drake, never corrected the narrative. I didn't need to. The market had delivered the verdict. When trust is broken in a business built entirely on trust, the correction isn't a crash, it's an exodus. And so I watched from a distance as the firm I helped build slowly rebranded, shrunk its footprint, and vanished from client conversations. Not out of malice, out of irrelevance, there was no speech, no parade, just a quiet shift in the wind, and the clear sense that the people who were watching knew exactly what had happened. In today's economy, where efficiency often replaces empathy and strategy trumps substance, stories like this remind us of a fundamental truth. Relationships aren't corporate assets. They're human contracts, built slowly, broken quickly, and almost impossible to rebuild once neglected. Armitage Drake failed not because they misread the numbers, but because they misread the people behind them. They treated trust like it could be templated, standardized, and reassigned. But clients don't follow structures. They follow character. They follow integrity. They follow someone who answers the phone after hours not because it's required, but because it's right. The real lesson here isn't about revenge or redemption. It's about understanding where real value lives. In the moments of consistency that build credibility over time. Loyalty isn't a metric, it's a mirror. And when leaders forget that, the market reminds them. How many leaders today are quietly building their exit without even realizing it, just by forgetting the hands that helped them rise? If this story resonated with you, maybe because you've lived through something similar or you're in the middle of it now, let's talk about it in the comments. What does loyalty mean to you in a world that keeps trying to automate it? And if you found value in this story, consider subscribing. Not just for the next chapter, but for the conversations we need to have between them.